Welcome back to my channel. The heart of Jung's analytical psychology is your own individuation, my own individuation, that process that we all need to go through to become ourselves, to become a well-integrated person, to become a whole person. In this video, we'll be coming at this topic from every angle so that we can get a full picture of this process of individuation as Carl Jung understood it. Here at Pneumanosophy Academy, we believe in expanding consciousness and taking that pilgrimage into the imaginal. I'm Lewis, and if you'd like to be part of Pneumanosophy, do subscribe and click that bell. Any theories concerning Carl Jung, as you probably know, have to do with the exchange between the conscious and the unconscious, between conscious content, the conscious being that which we are aware of, that which we, are literally conscious of, that we can bring to mind, and the unconscious being everything within the psyche that we are not conscious of, that we don't currently remember, or that we even couldn't remember, because it's content which has been suppressed. And for Jung, of course, this content within the unconscious is not just material that has been suppressed, as is the case with Freudian psychoanalytical theory. There's already material in the unconscious for Jung. There's like a wellspring of material that we have inherited from our ancestors. So Jung's theory of individuation is wrapped up with three key ideas in Jungian psychology. You have the ego, the self, and archetypes. So I'll just go through those quickly. The self is the core of the psyche, but it's also the totality of the psyche. So the psyche being everything which is unconscious and everything which is conscious. So the self is kind of an archetype in itself. It's the objective that we're striving after. We want to kind of realize our own self. And that means understanding the unconscious and the conscious and how they relate together. So that's the kind of totality element of it. But then being the core as well, it's almost like you're kind of, the more you delve into your own interior self, you get deeper and deeper to the core of who you are, you get deeper and deeper towards your own self. The second one, the ego. So the way Jung uses this term is a bit different to our kind of everyday sense. So in everyday terms, we kind of think of the ego as a negative. We talk about someone being egotistical, meaning they're entirely self-absorbed. Whereas for Jung, the ego is more or less synonymous with consciousness. So it's like the lens upon which you are experiencing reality, experiencing the world. And then finally, archetypes. Archetypes is these primordial images which populate the collective unconscious. So for Jung, there are different layers to the unconscious. There's your own personal unconscious, which is all your own kind of suppressed material that you were once consciously aware of, but for whatever reason, the childhood experience, it was pressed down and became part of your personal unconscious. And through work, through dream work, through self-exploration, through active imagination, you can kind of uncover that suppressed unconscious material. But for Jung, it goes much deeper than that. There's also a collective unconscious. Furthermore, trying to understand Jung's concept of conscious and the unconscious and the two layers of the unconscious, there's a hand analogy, which I think is quite good. The fingernail represents consciousness or the ego. And then as we go down deeper into stuff which is still part of us personally, but has been suppressed by us for whatever reason, we get into the individual unconscious, which is an area that can be tapped into, material that you can explore through dreams or through active imagination, or in a multitude of different ways, automatic writing, for example. And then, if this is me and this is you and this is somebody else for example, these all represent different individuals. You eventually go deep enough down into the unconscious that you get to a kind of unified field, which Jung calls the collective unconscious. So this is kind of like primordial, meaning really old, imagery and ideas, which has been kind of passed down generation to generation, kind of in Darwinian terms. If you think of instincts, for example, it relates very closely to that. So birds migrate south for the winter. Why do they do that? It's not because they've been taught necessarily. It's because it's instinctually part of who they are. So in the same way, Jung would argue that there are kind of psychological processes which are instinctively part of us, and that is what makes up the collective unconscious. So the form of that is archetypes. So the collective unconscious is populated with a whole host of archetypes. And they're all the ones that you've probably heard of before, like the hero archetype, or the great mother, or the trickster, or God, or whatever. Jung kind of sets out a particular list, but he alludes to the idea that there's way more archetypes than he has made himself aware of. However, when we experience an archetype, the archetype is kind of so broad and so complex. We never really encounter the archetype directly. We only ever encounter images of the archetype. So part of our individuation might be to raise our own consciousness, which means coming to terms with or making ourselves more aware of unconscious protection strategies that our unconscious has kind of deployed in order to protect our psyche or our ego. So, for example, shadow. We have a shadow. We project our shadow onto others. So this is the repressed material about ourselves that we don't like, the darker aspects generally of ourselves that we don't like. And then we see it in others kind of being reflected back at us, or the other person kind of acts like a mirror for us of the worst components of ourselves. That's when we kind of have this knee-jerk dislike for a particular other. And becoming aware of that triggering in ourselves allows us to become aware of our own shadow, and that in turn kind of raises our own consciousness, and helps in this process of individuation, helps us to become more integrated. So also part of this process of our consciousness and our unconsciousness interacting with each other has to do with social norms as well. Which is to say that we have obviously inherited a particular way of operating within society, particular things that we have gleaned from culture, which we therefore perceive as being good or bad. And that might be fine. We might be able to just kind of go with the flow of society or culture. But it's possible that the core of who we are, or our own identity, somehow jars with this societal norm. So part of our individuation is coming to terms with what has come to us from the outside, if you like, as opposed to what has arisen from within ourselves. Individuation is kind of recognizing that potential conflict and championing our own true self. And regardless of where that leads, that may lead us into conflict with society, broadly speaking. Because individuation entails becoming an individual, so no longer being a part of the collective masses. So if, all of society view something as being a norm, part of our individuation is at least recognizing how we are different in terms of our interiority from that collective whole, and then potentially even in the way that we live, separating ourselves from that collective normalized behavior. Jung also links individuation with his study of alchemy, which he came to in later life. So with alchemy, you have different components, if you like, being put into a single flask and then interacting with one another, breaking down so that a kind of whole can emerge. So you can understand that in terms of your own psyche. There are elements of your psyche, kind of atomized, separated elements of your psyche that don't really fully kind of integrate or understand each other. But through the process of life, so this kind of happens naturally, but it can also be helped along in kind of talking through and exploring this stuff. You allow those atomized pieces of the psyche to come together and cause a greater ideal to emanate forth. And that is the kind of goal that we're moving towards with individuation. Part of our dealing with wider society and culture is often has to do with the persona. So the persona is like your false mask. Now, false puts a very negative connotation on it, because in reality, we all need personas in order to operate within different sectors of society. So we'll put on a particular persona when we're at work, we'll put on a particular persona with our families or with our friends, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem arises when we identify with the persona. So this particular way we are perceived by our family, our friends, or our work colleagues, we start to think that that is who we are, whereas it's actually just a kind of protective exteriorization of a way that we operate within society. So individuation is at least momentarily being able to drop our persona, no longer identify with our persona, and recognize that there's a deeper, more essential part of who we are that we call the self, that we are moving towards. And so individuation or self-actualization is a process which unfolds gradually over the course of your life. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to explore more videos on Jungian theory, you can click right here.